Well, let's talk about the Middle East for the next few minutes, because in Washington, Donald Trump is hosting Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister has today been meeting the US Vice President J.D. Vance. He'll later go on to hold talks with the House Speaker Mike Johnson. We think that's in the next hour or so. Well, last night, President Trump said Hamas appears willing to agree to a ceasefire and that, quote, things are going very well. Well, in Israel itself, there have been fresh indications of what Benjamin Netanyahu and his government is planning for what comes after the war. Israel's defense minister says he's asked the military to prepare a plan to move all Palestinians in Gaza to a camp in the southern city of Rafah. Israel Katz wants to establish what he describes as, quote, a humanitarian city to initially house about 600,000 Palestinians and eventually the entire population of 2.1 million. Well, BBC Verify's Merlin Thomas has been analysing satellite imagery in the proposed area to look at the levels of destruction.
Israel's Defence Minister Israel Katz has announced plans to move Palestinians to what he's called a humanitarian city, a move some legal experts say would be illegal. This camp is planned to be built in the ruins of Rafah in southern Gaza and initially aims to move 600,000 already displaced Palestinians from the coast. Katz said development of this zone would happen during any potential ceasefire. The region where the so-called humanitarian city is planned has been subject to a recent wave of destruction. And satellite imagery shows that much of southern Gaza has already been the focus of intense destruction by the Israeli army since the start of the war. But much of it has been taking place more recently. Let's take a closer look. For example, this is part of central Rafah on the 29th of March. You can already see that there are areas that have been destroyed here. And this is from the 4th of July. And you can see that almost every building has been razed to the ground in a period of just over 3 months. Elsewhere, in the governor of Rafah, this is Tel al-Sultan on the 29th of March. And you can see the effects of what over 17 months of war has wrought. But then, within a couple of months, the vast majority of this neighbourhood has been reduced to rubble and completely flattened. Even the Saudi neighbourhood in Rafah, where most buildings were still standing in June, on satellite imagery, you can see that dozens of buildings have been destroyed in recent weeks. It's worth saying these are likely to be demolitions rather than airstrikes, because this is an area held by the IDF for some time. And in other areas where they have operational control, there have frequently been videos showing controlled detonations. And there's still not that much detail on what this so-called humanitarian city would involve. But Katz said the ultimate aim would be to eventually move the entire population of Gaza into the zone. That's more than 2 million people. He said the goal would be to screen for Hamas operatives before allowing them inside, and then they wouldn't be allowed to leave. International lawyers have condemned these plans. One expert said the plan would be illegal on multiple levels as a war crime, a crime against humanity, and genocide. He also said it violates the right of internal self-determination in the sense that it denies the Palestinian people their right to live and move freely. Israel has categorically previously rejected such allegations. We asked the Israeli army about the level of destruction in parts of Rafah, and they told us that there is no IDF doctrine that aims causing maximal damage to civilian infrastructure, regardless of military necessity. IDF actions, they said, are based on military necessity and with accordance to international law.
Well, that was Merlin Thomas from BBC Verify. Let's speak to Ajit Sunjay, who's head of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights for the occupied Palestinian territories. He's there in Jordan's capital, Amman. And welcome here, Ajit, to the programme. Let us start with what we've just heard from Israel's Defence Minister. What do you make of what is being suggested here?
Look, there are several layers of problem here, and your correspondent has spelled out very clearly. First of all, we have to remember in this 20 months of assault on Gaza, there have been about 120 first displacement orders by Israel. And when they have displaced this close to 2.2 million population, they have not provided the life-saving necessities that is needed, whether it is water, sanitation, tents, food, or other urgently needed humanitarian aid. And this is what we're going to see even in the current plan that is being proposed. 600,000 people being squeezed into another corner over a period of time, and where there is nothing to support this population. What we fear is also a large number of detention of young people, family separation. And we have to remember, every time people who have been squeezed into corner in thousands, we have seen chaos. And we have seen how the Israeli Defense Force has used force on such people, and tens of people have been killed.
And just to be clear, if this plan were to go ahead, your concerns revolve around the lack of freedom, the fact that it's a camp that people can't leave, potential attacks, trapping them there, with the only alternative forcing people to leave Gaza. In your view, at every level, are those breaches of international law?
Absolutely. I think that's the most fundamental and important point. I think the Israeli government has actually spelled that out as a goal. They define it as voluntary departure. We have to be very careful in the kind of words we use. These are not voluntary departure. You have decimated Gaza. There is nothing left. It is full of rubble. The Israelis have destroyed schools, colleges, civilian infrastructure, water sources, everything, houses, residential buildings. Nothing is left. And in such case, when you're converted this place into a living hell, people are going to leave. That becomes forced displacement, and that is potentially a war crime.
Let me ask you about those talks that are going on in Washington. We heard what Donald Trump was saying. He still hopes there will be a ceasefire. If there is, how imperative is it, with whatever is agreed, the restoration of aid and aid delivered by the UN?
This is supremely important, and I think that's where the focus should be. The focus should be on ceasefire. It has to be on long-term ceasefire. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has called for the release of hostages, and we have to focus on rebuilding Gaza. The focus should be on making sure that the people are able to return to their places of residence, and we reconstruct Gaza. Meanwhile, we are able, as the UN, to provide humanitarian aid in massive amount, and that's where the focus should be.
A final thought about the current need for 2.1 million people. When in past weeks I've spoken to aid agencies, they've often said they've simply run out of language to describe how bad it is. What is your assessment? Can you find words?
I cannot. Look, I have appeared on BBC and other media several times, and each time in the last 20 months, we have used every word that comes to our mind. Catastrophic, beyond humanity, staying against humanity, so on and so forth. I mean, there is nothing left for us to describe about the dire situation in Gaza.
Ajit Sanjay, thank you very much for taking time to speak to us here on BBC News. Thank you.